All right, let's get this show on the road. I'm going to introduce Gary. Gary is the Managing Director of Indago Digital. For those of you who don't work with us already, he'll be introducing the topic and then handing over to Peter, who's our Chief Technical Officer and former head of SEO, former head of SEO, to go through the exclusive research that we've compiled. So I'll hand over to Gary and let's get this show on the road. Thanks, guys.
Hi. So the presentation we'll give today, we will try and do it within about 25 to 30 minutes. As Sarah points out, there's some unique research here. It's got a finance focus. We actually presented this at the recent Mumbrella Finance Summit. Quick intro to us. We're an acquisition specialist specializing in SEO and paid search, plus a number of other things. We're also a Google Premier Partner, which puts us in the top 3% of agencies globally. As Sarah said, there will be myself presenting. I will tee up the overall presentation, talk around how there's this mashup between SEO and UX, and really how good SEO equals good UX equals good SEO. And Peter will talk around the tools that one can utilize to help improve your own UX. So SEO tools will help improve UX. Can you still hear me, by the way? Just because your earbuds connected.
They shouldn't connect.
So why search marketing is so important? We'll tee it up with this. I've been presenting this slide for a number of years, and if you think about most advertising, that's right. If we think about most advertising, we're talking at audiences. We're talking them based on who we believe they are. We're also hoping they've got a relevant and current need. Maybe they've already purchased life insurance from us. They don't have a car. They don't need car insurance. The search is really unique, and that's why it's the most invested in of all digital channels in Australia and globally. People actually tell us what they want, and from their search query, we can garner a lot of information. If we look at the two search terms in this example, we have car insurance quotes. The word quote signifies that they're interested in buying. You know, they're coming close to the bottom of the funnel, and they're obviously interested in car insurance. Home loan calculator, they want a home loan. Calculator signifies that they're still in the research phase and they're higher up the funnel. So we can garner a lot of information, but the reason search works so effective, it's demand based. But interestingly, it's also what we call a capture channel. I don't know if anyone remembers Rhonda and Katut and what brand they represented. It's actually 10 years ago, bizarrely. I don't know if anyone in the chat box wants to put what brand it is. There's always someone who knows. 100%. It's quite crazy how many people know. It just shows the effectiveness of a good ad campaign, actually, and good delivery. But we can use search to actually understand how good that campaign was. And on the next slide, we look at two graphs here. The top one is Google Trends. I'm going to assume most of you know that. And we can clearly see when the initial campaign launched some 10 years ago. And then we can also see when they made a bit of a resurgence last year, trying to promote all of us to get COVID vaccinations. And bizarrely, again, if you look at the bottom graph, we can see that there's still thousands of very, very strange individuals still searching for Rhonda Rockets every month. So we can also use search as a capture channel to understand other media. So why SEO? Because obviously what we're talking around is this alignment between SEO and UX. If we look at the data that we have from our clients and most studies you look at on this, they talk about a 70-30 split. So 30% of all clicks from a search go to paid search and 70% to SEO. So we know that SEO is the lion's share. And what we also know is the higher up you are, the more clicks you receive, and it kind of exponentially drops down. So the difference between position 1 and position 2 is pretty drastic. Position 1 and position 10 on the first page is obviously ginormous. So if we're doing SEO, it's really important to be at the top. Now, as I said, this presentation was originally given in the Mumbrella Finance Summit. So it has a finance steer. So what we first did is we did analysis of all of our finance clients to understand where their traffic comes from and what percentage of conversions come via SEO. And what you can see here is that 56% come directly or indirectly via SEO. Extremely important, and I think you need to look at what percentage of your traffic comes from SEO, because what we know is that a site that is heavily SEO'd has great UX and drives great conversions. What we also know is that SEO actually should drive one of your lowest cost per acquisition. So for a healthy website, SEO is critical. I clubbed up with a friend of mine who works for a company called Athena. Now, if you don't know who Athena are, they are a competitor research tool specializing in search. And what they've done here is they have provided me over a few years, I can't even see it, but a few years, they've provided me the increase in cost per clicks on Google for the home loan vertical. So, all the key terms within home loans. And what we can see is we've got a 254% increase in cost per click. And again, this adds gravitas to the reason why SEO is so important, because often we're getting priced out of paid search. It's becoming almost unworkable because of the increase in cost. And actually, if you look at that, you can see the increase is actually much, much more recent. It's kind of in the past year. And often there's cause and effect. And so if we look at the next slide, what we can see is that we can see the amount of loans being provided in dollars over the same time frame. And what we can see is that the increase in cost per click is directly correlated to the increase in housing finance approvals. So we can see that that's happened. But again, it adds gravitas to why SEO is so important. Very similar here, Athena provided us data on personal loans. We can see 145% increase. Very similar, we're looking over a long time frame, but we can see that this increase is much sooner, or much more recent, I should say. And I'm not saying this is definitely wide, but this increase in cost per click directly correlates to when the government stopped the recent JobKeeper payment. So, were people more in need of cash and taking loans? But again, paid search becoming more expensive, very more mature market. SEO is critical. So we'll start talking around SEO, Google, and UX. Now, what most of us probably don't realize is that Google's been affecting UX since inception in 98. The question that we always ask people is, why do we use Google and not AltaVista or, I don't know, Yahoo, Ask, AOL? Why are some of them not even around anymore? And the fact of the matter is it provides the best results. And what does that mean? It provides the best user experience. And that's why it won the race. And what happened back in the day when it launched is it came up with this design, or rather, this was the design of everyone else at the time. This was Yahoo, and they came up with this design. And the key difference we had was all of the other search engines were portals in essence. You could find out about your shares, you could book a holiday. It was a plethora of information. What Google realized was the best UX was a simple UX. And really what they realized is what they wanted people to do was to search. So why confuse it by giving them other options? And I think, if you look at UX and design over the past, 20 years, it has become much, much simpler. And Google were probably one of the first websites to actually push that simple UX. Then what they did in subsequent years, they launched, this is quality score. So this is obviously a paid search metric. So what they realized was if the advertiser, the person paying to get customers via Google, were providing a great experience, those customers would come back to Google. So what they did is they created this thing called quality score, which said, if you provide them a great experience, we will make your cost per click cheaper. And one of the key facets of quality score is your landing page. Is your landing page, does it load quickly? Does it have the right content on it? Are people staying on your website? So even from back then, Google have started to affect our UX, but this is more around paid search. And then in subsequent years, they started to affect design via SEO and their algorithm updates. So if we have a look at this slide, there's two parts to it. There's the left-hand side, which is where they started to affect UX mostly via content, making sure that content was of a great quality, that it wasn't duplicate. And more recently, if we look at the right-hand side, with a focus on speed and accessibility, which is really what we're here to talk about today. And if you look at the right-hand side, in 2021, they launched one of their biggest algorithm updates, which was called the Core Experience Update and Core Web Vitals. And that's what Peter will start talking about. So we're talking around UX, and what we're saying is UX creates great SEO. And we're saying that great SEO creates great UX. And great UX creates good CRO, conversion rate optimization. It's this kind of holy trinity as such. And we know that if we've got great SEO, we've got more traffic. So the three are closely aligned. It's very rare in marketing where we have this perfect storm where everything works in our favor. Too often than not, things work against us. But here we know great SEO is great UX is great CRO, etc., etc. So it's really, really a perfect storm. So if you get this right, we drive more traffic and we get better conversion rates. Now, what we're going to present to you, we're not saying that you should stop your usual way of looking at UX, the quantitative and the qualitative ways of doing this. You still do all the same. What we're just suggesting is you can add other tools onto it, utilizing vast sums of data. And that's what Peter's going to talk about, is how do you obtain that data to improve your UX. So if we look at Google, there's kind of three main ways it looks at UX. Now, we'll talk about two of them, not the third one. So the first one is speed and accessibility. Now, Google gives us a tool called Google Lighthouse. We'll show you how to use it. It also has another thing called Core Web Vitals. Now, we can see those, and Peter's going to show you data on those. And it looks at things like site speed and accessibility, etc., etc. So that'll be one set of the data that Peter will talk about. The second set will be about content. Now, Google uses an algorithm. We can't see the algorithm, but what we can see is what Google decides to display in the SERPs, the search engine results pages. And again, what we can then do is we do analysis on the SERPs to understand what the algorithm is doing. Now, the third part, which is this first-party data, we don't have, so we won't be talking about that. Peter will be presenting speed and accessibility via Lighthouse, content via the algorithm. So when we look at Lighthouse, which we'll show you how to use, we can use it in Google Chrome really easily. It gives us these 5 metrics. But today, unfortunately, the animation is not working on this, but today what we're going to do is we're going to be focusing on the top 2. Performance and accessibility, because that's obviously the subject matter for today's presentation. He'll then be showing us Core Web Vitals, which is very much a pass or fail type scenario. And here we can see URLs that are passed, some that are average, and some that are good. And he'll talk you through that. But that's the other way we can see the accessibility. And then the third one, as I said, is actually looking at the SERPs. So what we do is we do analysis of the keywords that are, of the pages that are shown within the search engine, and we can understand certain facets of them. How long are they? How many images are in there? How many times is the keyword in there? And what's within that content? Does it have an FAQ section? Does it have a calculator, some type of widget? Does it have other pages that support it? And they'll be the main things that Peter will be talking through. So what I'll do is I'll hand over to Peter, and he'll talk through the research. And I appreciate your time.
Hey guys, how are we doing? Any questions? No. Okay. Obviously, just a reminder: if you do have any questions as I go along, please just pop them into the chat, and I'll be sure to try and answer those. So I'll just kind of continue on. Thanks, Gary, for a great intro. So before we get into it, I'm just going to try and give you a bit of a backstory. Back while I was heading up the SEO team, we kind of came to the realization that we were sitting on a gold mine worth of data. We sort of said to ourselves, we need to get a bit serious about the way we use data. So in turn, we set up a data consultancy agency called Indago. It sits within Indago. I moved into a head of SEO role, and then from there I moved into a CTO role rather, and then from there we built up a data team. And the data team has been working a whole array of projects, but one of them is what you see on screen, this data warehouse that we've constructed. So this data warehouse essentially takes data from a whole array of APIs, marketing sources. You can see those on the top left there. And then we also try and enrich that data as much as possible through proprietary software that we've created, which I'll talk to about a little bit further down in the presentation. We store all of that data, and then from there we visualize it using a whole array of tools. And if you're a current a client, you've probably come across some of the reports that we've been able to generate through this service that we've built. Part of what we can do within this data warehouse is what we call, and as Gary mentioned, Cert Analysis, where we look at keywords and what's ranking, what pages are ranking for those keywords. And we then send crawlers to these pages in a very kind of efficient and in mass essentially, and look at what's on these pages. There are so many things that you can look at. For the purpose of today, we're really focusing on more of the UX factors. So things like performance. When I mention performance, essentially meaning site speed, accessibility, and content. One thing that the two things that SERP analysis allows us to do is one, draw correlations. So what we can do is we can correlate various different ranking factors and understand how important they are to ranking highly on the search engine. Some factors are more important to others, and they're very different depending on the keywords and the intent driven behind the keywords, as we'll kind of discover as we go through. The other very important thing that we can do is we can establish benchmarks. So we can understand what are kind of the minimum standards we need to be hitting on some of these factors in order to be competitive in the search engine results. So I'm going to take you through 3 data sets. Each have unique kind of insights, and they're very big. So we're just going to be really scratching the surface. In this first one here, we're actually combining 2 publicly available data sets. So I say public, you can access these. And they're readily available online if you just Google them. So the first one is Crux. Crux stands for the Chrome User Experience Report. It's a public data set provided by Google, and it aims to measure your experience across the Chrome browser. You may not be aware of this, but if you're using Chrome, you've very likely opted in to allow Google to sample your experience across that browser when visiting web pages. This data set's huge, right? So the numbers are there. I think it's 40 million rows of data analyzing 35 million domains and growing every day. The other data set that we're also going to look at in this first section is the HTTP archive data set. This is another public data set provided by httparchive.org. This data set tracks how the web is built from a technology standpoint and how that technology is evolving over time. And again, very similar sizes in the data with this data set. We can start to do some really unique research when we kind of look at these 2 data sets, both in isolation and when we try and connect them up and kind of understand the relationship between them. Just going to check if we've got any questions. Yeah, okay. So the first insight that I can share with you is when we look solely at the Crux data set. So what we've done here is we're measuring the percentage of domains that are passing the Web Core Vitals test. So what does it mean to pass Web Core Vitals? Google classifies a pass when you're providing, or when the web page is providing an exceptional user experience in relation to performance or site speed. So what we've done is we've audited the percentage of domains in the database that passed the test and classified them across these 3 segments. All Australian websites, all Australian finance websites that relate to finance, and then the globe, essentially everything else. So there's a couple of very simple insights here that you can derive. The first one is that, and as Gary mentioned, the focus around sorry, we've got a question come in. Is the webinar being recorded? I believe so. Yes. There'll be a link that will be sent around, I assume. Yep, it is recorded, and there should be a link that will come out after this. We just had it all good. So sorry, going back. So the first thing we can see here is that there's been an active push to get the web to run faster or go faster since 2020. If you remember the slide that Gary presented around the algorithm updates, Google released a Web Core Vitals update around about that time, and you can see really industry has really started to push, the web has started to push to get websites to go faster, which is a great thing. It just means that better experience for everyone. We can see that for finance isolated, that finance is performing well above the global average. However, for Australia segments, we're actually quite below the global standard there. So it's just kind of interesting to see that. The other key thing here is that while within finance we seem to be performing quite well, there's still about 60% of domains in this segment that are not passing the core Web Vitals test. And I've looked at the data, and I wouldn't name and shame any brands here, but there are some pretty significant brands in that 60% that do not pass. And I think the key thing here is to ensure that you're not one of those, or your domain is not within one of those segments. So I'll kind of touch on this later, but checking whether or not you pass the Web Core Vitals test is really easy. You just go to Google Lighthouse. You'll be presented with a tool, chuck in your domain, and you'll get your answer there. The next insight that I'm going to share with you really revolves around this new technology called headless. Now, if you're not familiar with headless, I'll give you a real quick crash course. Essentially, it's a new technology or framework around building websites. What we do here is we decouple the back end. So a back end might be any database service, for example, to the front end. And when you do this, it allows you to build websites or create websites via statically generated content, as a web developer would describe. And that allows web pages to run really, really fast, right? And what we're seeing is that there's been a mass adoption rate in the last, about 3 or 4 years to kind of push towards this technology purely around the speed aspect. And we're seeing that anyone in this space is actually winning the race when it comes to site performance. So with that in mind, what we're doing here is we're now using the same data set that I showed you earlier, the Web Core Vitals test out of the Crux database, but we're connecting the HTTP archive data set. And by connecting the HTTP archive data set, we can start to look at things from a technology standpoint. And in this case, we've looked at CMS providers. So the CMS providers that we've labeled here are a handful that are relatively known. If you've worked on a website before or done any website admin, you're probably familiar with one of these. In particular, probably WordPress is probably the most well-known CMS provider. So a couple of key insights here. First, we can see the same trend around actively trying to get the web to go faster. There are some CMS providers that are doing a better job at this than others. And in fact, I think I read recently that WordPress had recently been working very closely with Google engineers to try and get WordPress to run a lot quicker, because it's notoriously been a bit of a problem within this space. And that might explain their big push recently. But the key insight here on this graph is that green line, Sanity. If you're not familiar with Sanity as a CMS provider, Sanity is one of the leaders in headless CMSs. So if you're building a headless website, you'd likely need a headless CMS, and Sanity is one of those. And again, this just goes back to show how powerful headless can be, where we're seeing anyone developing headless websites winning the race when it comes to site performance. So something to look at when you're kind of looking at building a new website or looking at website improvements. Okay, so moving on to the second data set that I'm going to showcase. So this data set comes directly out of our data warehouse. We've been collecting this data since 2020. And the key difference with this data set and what I showed you earlier is really around, this is where we start analyzing ranking positions across all these kind of ranking factors. So we look at things like content on pages, word count, keywords, etc., as well as UX factors such as page experience around performance and accessibility. This data set's also really big. We've been collecting it since 2020. It's about 40 million rows. We've analyzed over 100,000 keywords, and we've crawled just over a million URLs to date. And just a reminder, I already presented this slide. This is where we start to crawl the websites and understand various factors on them. So, key insight number one. All right, when we look at these keywords and analyze that 100,000 keywords that we've looked at, it's very clear that accessibility has a very strong correlation when it comes to ranking position, which is what is shown in this graph. We've looked at all the websites and all the keywords and analyzed where those websites perform from an accessibility standpoint, and you can definitely see that there's a very strong correlation here. And I can very confidently tell you that if you want to be ranking across Google, you need to be taking accessibility very seriously. What are we talking about when we look at accessibility? So accessibility is a score provided by Google. The information is readily available. It is a series of checks, 42 individual checks that Google looks at to understand whether or not you're meeting kind of minimum requirements. It looks at very simple things like how hard content is to view. So an example there will be, white text on a grey background. That obviously would create a visual challenge. Or buttons that are too close to each other. I believe Google calls them target. So obviously, again, that's going to create an accessibility issue. Again, you can put your pages into the Lighthouse tool, and it will come back with issues that it discovers around these. The second piece of information that I can share with you is around performance. And again, just a reminder, this is page speed is what we're talking about. The correlation here is also strong. Maybe not as strong as accessibility, but still quite substantial, right? And again, this goes back to the way Google's been communicating with the SEO community since 2020 around web core vitals. Now, the reason why I feel like this performance or this factor is not as, the correlation is not as strong is probably because performance is a lot harder to get right than it is around accessibility. So if you've ever worked within on a web dev team or try to get a website to go faster, you'll probably find that making site speed improvements requires a lot of developer resource. So it's just a little bit harder to get right. But we can see here that's still a very substantial correlation. What does Google look at when it looks at performance score? So when Google released the Lighthouse tool, it kind of shifted the way it looked at site speed. It started to move more into user-focused metrics. So instead of looking at a page and in terms of how long it loads from point A to point B, so from the time you hit refresh to the time the page is completely loaded, it started looking at more user-centric metrics. So things like first meaningful paint. So how long it takes for something meaningful to display to the user, or time to interactive. How long the page takes to become fully interactive or usable. Again, these are all user-based metrics and really focus on how quickly the user is able to start consuming content. So I'm going to shift to keyword intent now, and I'm going to give you two keyword examples to kind of illustrate the differences between keyword intent and how that might shift the way you look at UX. So the first one here is car insurance. So if you were to Google car insurance, you'll very likely come up and find NRMA in one of the top positions. I'm not sure if the animation works here. No, it doesn't. So go back. So if you come across this page, you'll probably find that these pages are very conversion focused, navigational in broad in intent. So what you'll find is that if you think about the keyword car insurance, right? It's not really explicit around what the user's trying to do, what they're looking to find. It's very kind of navigational. So the pages that will come up will try and direct the user to a more narrow path or more specific area on their website. So that's what I mean by broad and navigational. And typically you'll find that these pages are very low in content, right? They're trying to navigate the user, so they're not trying to muddle the experience. In turn, if you look at a more long tail query, so the example here we've used is, does car insurance cover hail damage? You'll very likely come across Finder. So we all know Finder is a great website that provides really good information, and that's what this page does. It's a much more research-focused page, a lot more informative. The intent is much more narrow. It's very specific about what the user's trying to understand or research. And typically what you'll find is these pages have much more content on them. They're trying to provide as much information to the user as possible. So with that in mind, what information can I share with you? We can definitely see that when we look at the query word count, so the length of the keyword that we're searching within Google, we can definitely see there's a very strong correlation in terms of the length of content on the pages that rank for those queries. So on the left there, we've got the length of query to the body word count, so the amount of words on a page. And on the right there, we've subsequently got the same data. It's just pixel scroll height, how long the pages are. There's a very strong correlation here. Okay, so we're going to move on to the final data set. So this data set was put together just for the finance summit. We looked at 1,000 of the most searched queries within finance. And looked at these keywords specifically, just within AU. In turn, we crawled 20,000 URLs. And I think we've got the we've got the keywords on this slide here. So this is just an example of some of the keywords that we looked at and how we categorize them. So on the left, you've got the keywords, but I want to shift your attention to the right where we've classified them by intent. So we've done a very basic classification here. And we've called it intent. So whether or not the keyword is either conversion focused or more researchy. It's interesting to look at who ranks within these two segments when you look across that 1,000 keywords. So on the left, we've got the share of voice for the conversion focused keywords. And on the right, we've got the research focused keywords. So on the left, you can see that you probably got, no surprise, you've got all your top brands here. Everyone you'd expect to rank is here. Whereas you've got a bit of a mix and match on the right-hand side. A lot of government websites, a lot of kind of smaller brands, calculators, and so forth. And you can see a couple of brands here that are actually taking their more research-based content more seriously. For example, CBA seem to be doing really well across both. So yeah, it's just kind of interesting to see who ranks here and understand the differences. But more importantly, what are the correlations when it comes to performance? So this data actually, in my mind, in some ways contradicts what I previously presented to you, but I think it's important to show because it highlights the importance in auditing your specific query set for your specific users within your industry, right? So here we can see on the left that the conversion focused queries that there's what we call a neutral correlation. We cannot see any correlation when it comes to ranking position and site speed. Whereas on research, we can see that it is very strong. So if I had to guess why this is happening, it's very likely because the conversion focused queries are very focused around Google's obviously ranking larger brands, and there's the algorithm's probably more tailored towards the strength of those brands, right? So you think about the query home loan, for example, you're very likely going to get the 4 top banks, and site speed's not going to be a big factor. Whereas when you come to research focused queries, right, Google's trying to serve a much better experience and provide a great answer. And in fact, when it comes to, and particularly within this data set, you can see that there is no correlation across accessibility when we look at across those two segments of keywords, classifications of keywords. So I'm just going to try and wrap this up, and then I'll hand it back to Gary. So what are some of the key takeaways here? First off, use as much data as possible to help inform your UX decisions. Analyze the SERPS and establish your benchmarks. I mean, you can do this yourself just by looking at what ranks for the keywords that you're targeting. And there's obviously those 2 public data sets I spoke about earlier. Audit your website across Lighthouse. So are you passing the Web Core Vitals speed test? Don't just look at yourself, look at your competitors and understand understand why a competitor might be outranking you. These tools will actually give you suggestions on improvements that you can make, that you can hand down to your developers or pass along to a dev agency that you're working with. And finally, going back to what I spoke about around technology and headless, I definitely would encourage you to look at this. If you're in the process of building a new website, I definitely would be factoring in Web Core Vitals as a standard within your RFP process, and definitely be looking into headless as a technology option for your new stack. I'll pass back to you. Thanks, guys. If there's any questions, please pop them into the chat. I'm just going to pass back to Gary.
So really quickly, and just because I think, the ESG is obviously such a big thing with so many businesses at the moment, and we're spending a lot of time talking around how we can be more sustainable. And one of the key things that we can do today is actually have a more sustainable website. And if we look at websites that are more sustainable, they typically have better UX. So they are able to provide the consumer with information quicker. They load quicker, they use less resources. So I think probably the best thing to do is to have a site with great UX, get great SEO traffic, and also help the environment. That's all from us today. I really appreciate everyone's time. As was requested, the webinar is being recorded, and we will send it to everyone here. It'll also be posted to our website in the next couple of days as well, so you're welcome to come and find it there. If you've got any questions, please let us know now, or contact us. I assume most of you have our contact details anyway. No worries, Chris. Cool. All right, well, if there's no questions, have a great day. If you're in Sydney, enjoy the sun. We've got one question. I was using the page feed insights and got different results depending on when I hit search. Now, I'm going to make the assumption that, because if you look at page feed, it's very dependent on the browser. So maybe as your provider, the efficiency of your provider or your internet connection was changing, your page feed would change. It's dependent on the browser rather than the web page itself. It's a combination of the two. Would that be the best way of answering that?
Yeah. So there is a tool that you can use within Chrome itself. I'm not sure if you're using that one or you're using the browser version. So the Google, I believe it's on web.dev.com. That one should give you a much more consistent result, especially if it's pulling from the first time you used it, you got 92, and then you got browser version. Yeah, that's interesting. So there's two sets that you can get. One that comes out of the Crux, which is an aggregate of the Crux data that I showed you earlier, and one that is an experience that was at the time that you hit search. And as Gary said, there will be differences based on your internet connection at the time, your computer speed, all that sort of thing. So maybe go over it's only if Google has sampled it for your domain, but if you can get that one, the Crux data, you'll get a much more consistent result. Hopefully that helps.
Any other questions? Honestly, more than welcome to contact us. Have a great week. If you're in Sydney, enjoy this rare moment of sun. And thank you very much and see you all later.